Captain Naxos, we've detected an unauthorized entry into KX-789's atmosphere, announced First Observer Trell, their translucent tentacles rippling with excitement across the holographic display. Another foolish explorer about to become statistics in our research database, Captain Naxos replied, adjusting his sensory membranes to focus on the main view screen. His crystalline exoskeleton refracted the dim light of the bridge, casting tiny rainbows across the smooth, curved walls of the research vessel Galactic Seeker. The bridge crew of the most prestigious xenological research vessel in the Andromeda Scientific Fleet watched as a small craft, clearly of human design, descended through the roiling atmosphere of what they had classified as the most inhospitable Class 12 death world ever documented. "Bring up the subject's details," Naxos commanded, his voice carrying that special tone of someone about to witness a particularly entertaining disaster. Second Observer Pax, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with amusement, projected the information. Subject identified as Marcus Chen, human male, age 32 Earth years. Professional designation, survival expert. She paused, her upper appendages twitching in what passed for a laugh among her species, because apparently humans think expertise in dying is a career path. "How long do you estimate this one will last, Science Officer Cree?" Naxos asked, mandibles clicking in anticipation. Cree, their resident expert in death world phenomena, ran their calculations through their neural interface. Given the planet's conditions, surface temperature fluctuations of 60 degrees, atmospheric toxicity levels at 89%, predators that make our military drones look like cleaning bots. They projected a series of probability matrices into the air. I give him 6 hours, and that's being generous. The bridge erupted in chirps and clicks of amusement. They'd seen countless species attempt to brave KX-789's surface. None had lasted more than 2 planetary rotations. The last research team from the Rigelian Science Academy had lasted exactly 43 minutes before their environmental suits melted. "Should we prepare the standard death notification package for his next of kin?" Third Observer Zen asked, already pulling up the templates. "Let's wait until we actually confirm his demise," Naxos replied, settling into his observation pod. "Though do start the betting pool. Standard rules apply. Closest to actual survival time gets first pick of the salvage rights." They watched as Marcus Chen's ship executed a perfect landing sequence in a valley surrounded by razor-sharp crystal formations. The human emerged wearing what appeared to be laughably inadequate protective gear by their standards. A simple environmental suit that looked no more sophisticated than what their species used for routine maintenance walks. "Look at that," Pax commented, her bioluminescence flickering with mirth. "He's not even wearing a proper radiation shield. Those crystals will cook him from the inside out within the first hour." "Recording commenced," Trell announced. "This will make an excellent addition to our Ways Not to Survive training documentation." Captain Naxos stretched his sensory stalks for a better view. Well, at least this one should be entertaining. Begin official observation log. Human subject Marcus Chen, demonstrating typical human overconfidence in face of certain death, has landed on KX-789. Time of expected expiration, shall we say, before the local sun reaches apex. Not one of them noticed the slight smile on Marcus Chen's face as he began unloading his equipment, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. After all, how could they know that humans had a saying about being underestimated? "For the official record," Science Officer Cree announced, their neural sensors pulsing with professional detachment, "KX-789's current surface conditions are, well, let's just say they're spectacular in their lethality." The holographic display filled with scrolling data as Cree continued their briefing. "We're looking at ground temperatures that swing from -40 to +60 degrees in a single planetary rotation. The atmosphere is a delightful cocktail of nitrogen dioxide, sulfuric acid, and several gases we haven't even named yet, and that's just the easy part." "Don't forget the wildlife," Pax chimed in, projecting footage of the local fauna. "Those crystal stalkers we spotted last week, They've evolved natural laser focusing through their crystalline bodies. Turns out being cut in half by a light beam is now a legitimate cause of death here. Captain Naxos floated closer to the observation screen, his crystalline structure reflecting the red glow of the planet below. Have we finalized the betting pool? I want everything properly documented before our human friend demonstrates the galaxy's most elaborate form of self-termination. Third observer Zen pulled up the holographic betting board. Current odds favor death by atmospheric poisoning within 4 hours, though Lieutenant Vax has placed an interesting bet on consumed by crystal stalkers while trying to make friends with them. Apparently she's been studying human nature. Too much studying, if you ask me, Trell muttered, adjusting the observation drones. I've positioned our monitoring network to capture every angle of this spectacular failure. High-definition visual, atmospheric composition readings, biometric scanning. We'll know the exact moment his cellular structure gives up and calls it quits. The crew watched as Marcus Chen methodically unpacked his landing vessel. Their amusement turned to confusion as he pulled out equipment that seemed bizarrely simple by their standards. A mechanical tool they recognized as a hammer. Sheets of some primitive material. Containers of what appeared to be just water. Is he seriously planning to build something with those antiques? Pax asked, her bioluminescence flickering in disbelief. Those tools look like they belong in a museum of primitive technology. Watch this, Kree said, zooming in on Marcus's face through his helmet visor. Notice anything strange? The crew leaned forward, their various sensory organs focusing on the human's expression. He's smiling, Zen asked incredulously. The atmospheric pressure alone should be causing him severe discomfort, yet he appears to be enjoying himself. Indeed, Marcus moved with the relaxed confidence of someone taking a pleasant stroll rather than fighting for survival on a planet that could kill him in roughly 50 different ways at any given moment. He paused to take readings with a handheld device, nodding to himself as if confirming something. The nerve, Captain Naxos muttered, acting like he's on some tropical vacation resort instead of a death world that ate 3 professional colonization attempts. They watched as Marcus began marking out a perimeter around his landing site, paying special attention to the wind direction and the positioning of the crystal formations. He pulled out what appeared to be a simple mechanical compass, making careful notes on an actual physical writing surface. Look at that primitive navigation tool, Trell scoffed. Our ship's AI would calculate optimal positioning in microseconds. Yes, but what happens when the planet's magnetic storms fry all electronic systems? Kree mused, a note of unwanted respect creeping into their voice. Which, according to my calculations, should happen in approximately 20 minutes. As if on cue, the first electromagnetic pulse of the day rippled across the valley. The research team's observation drones wavered, their signals momentarily scrambled. When the interference cleared, they expected to see chaos. Instead, Marcus Chen continued his work, completely unaffected, those simple mechanical tools functioning perfectly in conditions that would render their most advanced technology useless. Well, Captain Naxos said slowly, this might be more interesting than we anticipated. Zen, add a new category to the betting pool. Sir? Add survives first day through sheer dumb luck. I'm feeling generous enough to give 10-to-1 odds on that. None of them noticed that Marcus had already started constructing what appeared to be a simple shelter foundation, using techniques that predated spaceflight on his home world. Sometimes, they would soon learn, the old ways were the best ways. Captain, you need to see this, Pax called out, her bioluminescence pulsing rapidly. The human, he's gathering the toxic crystal formations, the ones that emit enough radiation to cook a Zentarian battle tank. Captain Naxos slithered to the observation post, his crystalline structure vibrating with disbelief. The morning sun of KX 789 cast long shadows across the valley as Marcus Chen, still very much alive after 48 hours, carefully selected and harvested the deadly crystal formations. That's not even the strangest part, Kree added, their neural tendrils twitching, According to our scans, he's using the radiation from the crystals to power a crude heating system. He's turned certain death into a power source. The research team had barely slept since the humans' landing, too fascinated by his methodical approach to survival. They watched as Marcus tested various local plants, consulting a simple paper notebook rather than any advanced scanning equipment. "Look at this recording from yesterday," Trell said, projecting a hologram. "He found those carnivorous vine clusters, the ones that dissolved our last probe, but instead of avoiding them..." The footage showed Marcus carefully harvesting the vines, wearing nothing but his basic protective suit. He processed them through some kind of mechanical press, extracting their acid. "He's using the acid to break down the mineral deposits in the soil," Science Officer Cree explained, failing to hide their excitement. "The processed soil becomes fertile enough to grow those emergency food plants he brought. It's ridiculous," Captain Naxos finished, though his tone carried more amazement than dismissal now. "The betting pool is in shambles. No one predicted turns deadly materials into survival resources." "Sir!" Zen called out suddenly, their appendages waving in alarm. "Atmospheric readings show a Class 5 storm approaching. Winds at 300 kilometers per hour, toxic rain and... Oh no!" They all watched in horror as the sky turned an ominous purple-black. Crystal storms were the deadliest weather phenomenon on KX 789. Microscopic crystal shards carried by supersonic winds could slice through standard emergency shelters like paper. "Surely this is it," Pax whispered. "No primitive structure could withstand..." She stopped mid-sentence. Marcus had begun adjusting the angles of his shelter's walls, creating a complex series of windbreaks. The design looked almost like... "He's using the wind against itself," Cree breathed, neural interface rapidly calculating the physics. The structure's shape forces the crystal-laden wind into a circular pattern, creating a protective vortex. The crystal shards are being deflected by their own momentum. The storm hit with apocalyptic fury. The research vessel's sensors struggled to penetrate the maelstrom of wind, toxic rain and crystal shards. For 10 excruciating minutes, they lost all visual contact. "Storm's clearing," Trell announced finally. "Getting visual now." The observation screen flickered to life. Where they expected to see wreckage, they instead found Marcus's shelter not only intact but improved. The crystal storm had actually reinforced his walls, the microscopic shards fusing together under the intense pressure to create a naturally armoured surface. They watched, dumbfounded, as Marcus emerged from his shelter, took one look at his new crystal-reinforced walls, and actually laughed. He pulled out his notebook, made a few notes, and proceeded with his morning routine as if surviving an unsurvivable storm was just another checkbox on his to-do list. "I believe," Captain Naxos said slowly, "we may need to reconsider our classification of humans as merely persistent Deathworlders." "Should we update the official observation log?" Zen asked, still staring at the footage in disbelief. "Yes. Note that subject Marcus Chen has demonstrated..." Naxos paused, searching for the right words. "An unprecedented ability to transform deadly planetary features into survival advantages through, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, primarily mechanical means." "Sir," Cree interjected, their neural sensors pulsing with an urgent realization. "He's not just surviving. Look at his project patterns, his resource gathering, the way he's processing materials. He's preparing to expand." The crew fell silent as they processed this information. Their collective scientific certainty, built on centuries of xenological research, was being systematically dismantled by one human with a toolbox and a paper notebook. "Well," Captain Naxos finally said, his crystalline form reflecting the light of the savage planet below, "at least no one can say our research mission is boring anymore. Zen, start a new betting pool." "On his survival time, sir?" "No, on how long it takes him to build a second shelter and make it a vacation home." "By the cosmic archives," Cree muttered, their neural sensors practically overloading with data. This human builds like he's solving a puzzle where every piece tries to kill him. Day 5 of their observation, and Marcus Chen had turned his survival shelter into what the research team could only describe as an engineering marvel born from madness and determination. The observation deck of the Galactic Seeker had become standing room only, with off-duty crew members crowding in to watch the ongoing construction. Notice his use of the crystalline ore deposits, Pax commented, projecting a detailed analysis. He's arranging them in a lattice pattern that shouldn't work according to any architectural principle we know, yet it's creating a self-reinforcing structure that's actually stronger than our advanced composite materials. Captain Naxos watched as Marcus layered the toxic vines between sheets of processed crystal. Our environmental engineers spent 3 decades trying to neutralize those vines, lost 2 research stations to them, and he just weaves them like fabric? The acid from the vines reacts with the crystal structure, Cree explained, their excitement barely contained. It's creating a natural polymer that's both flexible and stronger than steel. He's literally making his shelter grow stronger by using materials that should destroy it. They observed as Marcus worked through the brutal midday heat, his movements efficient and purposeful. He'd developed a routine, testing new materials in small sections, observing their reactions, then incorporating successful elements into the larger structure. "Compare this to our last attempted outpost on KX 789, Trell said, bringing up historical footage. 300 engineers, the most advanced construction drones in the galaxy, and 15 billion credits in materials. Lasted 6 days before total structural failure." The crew winced at the memory. It had been considered the most sophisticated attempted settlement of a death world in galactic history. Now they watched as a single human with hand tools showed them exactly why they'd failed. "We over-engineered everything," Zen realized, their appendages gesturing at their own ship's systems. "Look at our approach versus his. We tried to fight the planet's conditions with technology. He's letting the planet do the work for him." Marcus had discovered that the massive temperature swings could be used to temper his crystal walls. The toxic atmosphere, rather than being filtered out, was channeled through specialized chambers where it broke down into more useful compounds. Even the dreaded crystal stalkers, which had torn through their military-grade barriers, now avoided his shelter thanks to a clever arrangement of sonic resonators made from hollow crystal formations. "Speaking of fighting the planet," Pax announced, "watch this. He's about to test the new wall section." The crew gathered closer as Marcus approached a newly constructed portion of his shelter. He'd incorporated a strange webbing pattern into the structure, using materials that by all scientific logic should have violently reacted with each other. "That's load-bearing crystal matrix right next to acid-producing vine fibers," Cree said, their voice filled with professional horror. "The chemical reaction alone should—" Marcus struck the wall with his hammer. Instead of shattering or dissolving, the structure rang like a bell, the vibrations spreading through the webbing in a complex pattern. The crystal matrix flexed, the vine fibers stretched, and the whole section seemed to absorb and redistribute the force. "Impossible," Captain Naxos whispered. "Our best shock absorption systems can't match that level of energy distribution, and he built it from materials we classified as apocalyptically unstable." "Sir," Trell called out, "atmospheric readings show he's created a microclimate around the shelter. The toxic elements in the air are being naturally filtered by the crystal vine matrix. He's not just surviving the atmosphere, he's terraforming it." The observation deck erupted in excited chittering and bioluminescent flashing as the crew tried to process what they were seeing. Generations of scientific doctrine about death world survival were being rewritten by what looked like, to their advanced sensibilities, barely more than clever stick arrangement. "Look at his latest addition," Zen said, zooming in on a new feature. "He's integrated those sonic-sensitive crystal growths into the wall structure, the ones that shatter at specific frequencies." They watched as Marcus finished installing what appeared to be wind chimes made from crystal shards. As the violent winds blew through them, They produced specific tones that made the entire shelter vibrate at a precise frequency. The vibrations are strengthening the molecular bonds, Cree realized, their neural sensors processing the data. The stronger the wind, the stronger the shelter becomes. It's like he's turned the entire structure into a self-reinforcing symphony. Captain Naxos cleared his throat, his crystalline form shifting colors with emotion. Update the official record. Note that human adaptation techniques appear to operate on principles we previously considered scientifically impossible. Also note that our definition of impossible may need significant revision. Sir, Pax interrupted, her bioluminescence pulsing rapidly. He's looking up at us. The crew froze as Marcus Chen, standing atop his nearly completed shelter, waved casually at their observation vessel. He'd known they were watching the entire time. And then, in a gesture that would be discussed in xenobiological conferences for decades to come, he pointed to his shelter, gave them a thumbs up and went back to work. "Did he just—" Trell began. "Yes," Captain Naxos replied, a new respect in his voice. "He just critiqued our entire approach to Deathworld colonization with a single hand gesture. Add that to the record too. And someone please tell me we're recording his construction techniques in enough detail to revolutionize our entire engineering field." "Already on it, sir," Cree confirmed, though I suspect understanding how he does it and replicating it are two very different challenges. Sometimes I think he's not so much building a shelter as conducting a negotiation with the laws of physics. And somehow he's winning. "Multiple seismic events detected." Trell's voice cut through the observation deck's usual chatter. "The planet's crust is destabilizing. This is beyond anything in our records." The crew of the Galactic Seeker watched in horror as massive crystal spires erupted from the ground around Marcus's shelter. The valley floor cracked open, releasing geysers of superheated toxic gas. The sky turned a sickening shade of green as atmospheric compounds began breaking down. "By the void," Captain Naxos breathed, his crystalline structure paling. "The planet's entering a catastrophic transformation cycle. Even our most hardened emergency pods couldn't survive this." "Should we intervene?" Pax asked, her bioluminescence flickering anxiously. "Our rescue protocols—" "Wait," Cree interrupted, neural sensors pulsing. "Look at his readings. His heart rate hasn't even spiked. He's smiling again." They watched, transfixed, as Marcus Chen surveyed the apocalyptic scene with what could only be described as professional interest. He pulled out his notebook, made a few quick sketches, and then began to whistle. "Is he using the catastrophe as a power source?" Zen asked incredulously. Marcus had already started adapting his shelter. He redirected the toxic geysers through a series of crystalline tubes, using the pressure to drive primitive but effective turbines made from salvaged ship parts. The rising crystal spires were incorporated into his structure's support system, turned from deadly hazards into natural buttresses. "The atmospheric degradation is reaching critical levels," Trell reported. "No known filtration system could— What in the galaxy is he doing now?" The human had created what looked like a massive wind instrument from the hollow crystal formations. As the toxic winds howled through it, it produced specific frequencies that caused certain atmospheric compounds to precipitate out of the air. "He's playing the atmosphere like a musical instrument," Cree whispered in awe. "The crystallized compounds are becoming a natural shield against the radiation spikes." "Captain," Pax urged, "protocols state we must offer evacuation in cases of planetary extinction events." Captain Naxos raised his sensory appendages, studying the situation. And how exactly would we explain to our superiors that we interrupted what appears to be a human turning an extinction-level event into a home improvement opportunity? The debate was cut short by a new development. Marcus had begun harvesting the newly emerged crystal spires, using their natural energy-conducting properties to create what appeared to be a primitive but effective planetary stabilization grid. "Impossible," Cree muttered, their neural interface struggling to process the data. He's using the planet's own destructive forces to stabilize it. The crystal network is redistributing the seismic energy, creating a feedback loop that's actually calming the tectonic activity. The crew watched in stunned silence as the crisis slowly subsided. Where there had been chaos, there was now a sort of savage harmony. The toxic geysers provided power, the crystal spires reinforced the shelter, and the altered atmosphere created a surprisingly stable microenvironment. "Final readings coming in," Trell announced. "The immediate area around his shelter is now more habitable than before the catastrophe. He's actually improved his living conditions by surviving an extinction event." Marcus stood in the doorway of his enhanced shelter, casually dusting off his hands. He looked up at their ship again and gave them a small salute, before heading inside to what they presumed was a well-deserved rest. "Update the official record," Captain Naxos commanded, his voice carrying a mix of disbelief and respect. "Note that subject Marcus Chen has demonstrated the unique human ability to treat planetary catastrophes as home renovation opportunities." "Should we still maintain rescue protocols on standby?" Zen asked. "At this point," Naxos replied, watching as Marcus's shelter began to glow with a soft, sustainable light, powered by the very forces that should have destroyed it, "I'm not entirely sure who would be rescuing whom." The research team sat in contemplative silence, their various instruments recording data that would take xenobiologists decades to fully understand. They had come to study survival against impossible odds. Instead, they were witnessing something far more remarkable: the transformation of impossible into inconvenient and inconvenient into useful. "One thing's certain," Cree noted, their neural sensors still processing the events. "We're going to need a new classification system. Deathworlder doesn't quite cover catastrophe enthusiast." Final report on subject Marcus Chen, Day 30 of observation on planet KX 789. Captain Naxos spoke into the ship's recorder, his crystalline form catching the light of the now transformed valley below. "To say our initial assessment was incorrect would be like saying a supernova is merely warm." The observation deck of the Galactic Seeker had been transformed into what the crew now called the Human Understanding Center, its walls covered with analysis of Marcus's survival techniques. Pax floated near the main screen, her bioluminescence steady as she compiled the final data. "In just 30 days, she reported, the subject has not only survived but established what our xenological standards would classify as a highly sustainable habitat. Though personally I'd classify it as smugly sustainable, given how often he waves at our ship while drinking his morning coffee on the toxic vine-turned-garden patio." "The betting pool has been permanently suspended," Zen announced, displaying the final tally. "No one won because no one bet on transforms Deathworld into vacation resort. The closest bet was Lieutenant Vax's goes mad and becomes planet's supreme ruler, which technically isn't entirely wrong." Science Officer Cree's neural interfaces were still processing the implications. "Our entire approach to hostile planet colonization has been fundamentally flawed. We've been trying to impose our will on deadly environments while humans, they treat planetary death wishes as suggestions." "Remember Day 25, Trell asked, bringing up the footage, "when that pack of crystal stalkers returned?" The crew chittered in amusement at the memory. The predators, which had terrorized previous research missions, now regularly passed by Marcus's shelter. He'd somehow transformed their hunting grounds into what he called a nice walking trail, complete with naturally formed benches made from processed crystal formations. "The official recommendation to the Galactic Science Council," Captain Naxos continued his recording, "is an immediate revision of our species classification system. Humans are not merely persistent or adaptable. They are, as we've observed, catastrophically innovative. Their response to mortality-threatening scenarios appears to be, and I quote from Subject Chen's own log, 'This looks like a fun challenge.'" "Don't forget the property values," Pax added. The area around his shelter has been classified as prime real estate by 3 different colonization assessors. He's actually increased the market value of a death world. The final images showed Marcus's completed settlement. What had started as a simple survival shelter had evolved into an elegant structure that worked in harmony with the planet's deadly forces. Toxic gases powered atmospheric processes, crystal formations channeled and purified energy, and even the dreaded acid rains were collected and used for what he called excellent pH balancing in the garden. "Last item for the record," Zen announced, pulling up the latest scans. "We've detected 2 more human ships entering the system. According to their communications, they're responding to something called vacation home reviews that Subject Chen posted on their information networks." Captain Naxos's crystalline structure shifted colors in what his crew now recognized as suppressed laughter. Final notation: when encountering a human on a death world, the scientifically appropriate response is not to ask how long until they die, but rather, how long until they install a hot tub. "Speaking of which," Cree interjected, "thermal scans show he's actually built one, powered by the geothermal vents we previously classified as instantaneously lethal." The crew gathered at the observation window for one last look at their subject. Marcus Chen stood outside his shelter, surveying his domain. The deadly world that had claimed so many advanced expeditions had been transformed into something that practically sparkled with habitability. He looked up at their research vessel, and in a final gesture that would be debated in scientific circles for years to come, pulled out a chair, sat down, and raised what appeared to be a glass of iced beverage in their direction. "End official report," Captain Naxos concluded. "Personal addendum. Next time we encounter humans, let's skip the Deathworld survival assessment and go straight to the real estate development proposals. It'll save everyone a lot of time."